You've got one last story for the night,
I do.
and it's going to be the best of all them, I assume.
I think it is. And it's scary because it's a nightmarish scenario.
You said this is a 100% true story.
Yeah, and it's because this story actually comes from the BBC News.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
This is titled "When Time Stood Still: A Hiroshima Survivor's Story." Okay, let me get myself queued up here. Summers in Hiroshima were suffocating, and the morning of August 6, 1945 was no different from any other hot and humid day. Shinji Mikamo had taken the day off from his work as an apprentice electrician in the army to help his father clear their home, which was soon to be demolished. Months of air raids had caused devastating fires in the cities across Japan, so the government had decided to create fire breaks. Mikamo's house was one of those to be flattened. Makes no sense, growled Shinji's father, Fukuchi. But orders were orders. Shinji's mother, Nami, who was gravely ill, had been evacuated to the countryside, and his older brother, Takagi, was fighting in the Philippines. So, 19-year-old Shinji and his father were living alone in the city. Before long, Shinji himself was due to end his apprenticeship and join the army, so he too would most likely move away. They set to work after the usual wartime breakfast of millet and barnyard grass porridge. Fukuchi would joke, "I wake up early nowadays because I am fed bird food." Fukuchi looked at the pocket watch he always carried with him, a round watch fitted in the palm of his hand. The silver casting worn smooth by his touch. It was 7:45. Shinji climbed up onto the roof to remove the clay tiles. Neighbors had offered the homeless pair a room, but there was no toilet. They needed the tiles to make a roof for an outhouse. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. From this vantage point, Shinji looked out over the gleaming city. Down in the yard, Fukuchi called up to the sun, not to daydream. Shinji quickened his pace. At nearly 8:15, he remembers lifting his right arm to wipe the sweat off his brow, when suddenly a blinding flash filled the sky. He recalls, "Suddenly, I was facing a gigantic fireball. It was at least 5 times bigger and 10 times brighter than the sun. It was hurtling directly towards me. A flame that was remarkably pale yellow, almost the color of white. The deafening noise came next. I was surrounded by the loudest thunder I have ever heard. It was the sound of the universe exploding. In that instant, I felt a searing pain that spread through my entire body. It was as if a bucket of boiling water had been dumped over my body and scoured my skin." Shinji was thrown into darkness as he was buried under the house. He became aware of his father's voice calling, coming closer. Although he was 63 years old, Fukuchi was strong. He pulled his son from under the rubble and put out the flames that was licking his body. Shinji's chest and right side of his body were completely burned. "My skin hung off my body in pieces like ragged clothes," he says. The raw flesh underneath was a strange yellow color, like the surface of a sweet cake his mother used to make. "My father and I looked at each other, frozen," Shinji said. The city around them had disappeared, reduced to ash and rubble. Shinji couldn't understand what had happened. It was as if the sun exploded. His father guessed the real cause immediately. "They've demolished all the houses for us," he said. "Guess they saved us some labor." There was no time to stand and talk, though. The ruined city was now on fire, and they had to take refuge. Shinji and Fukuchi headed toward the unfamiliar post-nuclear landscape to the river. While there, as bodies floated face down to the river, they soon witnessed another strange and terrifying phenomenon. The many fires across the city had created storm-force winds, which now combined into a tornado. A dark monster, Shinji says, that sucked up everything in its path. It picked up and threw down parts of collapsed houses, furniture, and water from the river. As it approached, people clung to whatever they could for safety. This new world was hard to understand. But once the fire and tornado had died down, Shinji and his father set off across the bridge in search of shelter. Walking was agony, not only because of his burned flesh, because of the large numbers of dead and dying bodies on the ground. My feet were charred and clumsy. Every step or so, I would unintentionally step on an arm or a leg and hear the person below me wince in pain. I felt like a vulture, crossing that bridge and leaving all those wounded people behind to die. Slowly, with my heart breaking to countless pieces, I stumbled forward. I did my best to follow exactly in my father's footsteps, hoping and believing he would know the path to save us both. The bomb had laid waste to Hiroshima. Out of its 45 hospitals, only 3 still functioned. There was no help, no medicine, no pain relief. Fully exposed on the roof, Shinji had been only 3/4 of a mile from the epicenter of the explosion. Shinji attributes his survival mostly to his father's strength. Whenever he wanted to give up, Fukoshi scolded him and said, "Don't slip into weakness so easily. We had made it through the worst." With barely any skin left to protect him, a little of Shinji's flesh scraped off with almost every step. When they were too weak to walk, he and his father would crawl instead. It took hours to cover short distances. He pleaded with his father to let him die, but Fukoshi was resolute. "You want to die? Don't say that word so lightly. As long as you stay alive, you will recover one day. The day will come, just a bit more to go." And eventually, they had a crucial stroke of luck. Returning again from the district where they had lived, they were recognized by Shinji's friend and fellow army apprentice. His name was Turo. As a civilian employed by the army, Shinji did have some privileges, so Turo was able to start pulling strings to get him evacuated for treatment. On the 9th of August, 3 days after the bombing, Shinji and his father were lying on the floor of a school in a village outside the city, along with dozens of other badly wounded people, when Shinji's thoughts turned to a disturbing incident the day before. As he and his father had made their way down to the Toshogo shrine, 2 soldiers had barred their way and told them to go back up the steps, an agonizing prospect. When Fukoshi protested, one of the soldiers spat in his face and told him to go to hell. In a society where the elderly were revered, this was deeply shocking, and yet Fukoshi had held it in his anger and turned away because staying alive was more important. It took them hours to make their way out to the back of the shrine, down a slope covered in prickly bushes and the splintered remains of wooden gate posts. Shinji cursed the soldiers with every painful step. Shinji just couldn't understand how the soldiers could have treated them like that. Consumed with anger and hatred, he turned to his father for an explanation. "They were demons, weren't they?" he said. "They were evil, maybe even worse than the American bombers." Fukoshi replied calmly, "We are in hell right now. It's no wonder that we are seeing demons." He reminded his son of the angels that they had come across, the neighbor who made the miso soup, Taro and his crucial intervention, the villagers who were attending to the wounded all around them. Shinji was forced to accept the goodness still existed. He fell asleep that night with tears of relief in his eyes. 2 days later, the soldiers came to take Shinji to a field hospital. Father and son survived for 5 days, wandering through post-apocalypse Hiroshima. But now they had to part. Fukoshi's unwavering gaze followed his son as he carried him out to a waiting army truck. When Shinji arrived in the hospital, the wounds on his legs were now badly infected. He needed draining of pus and maggots. His greatest pain, however, came from bed sores caused by the days of laying on the ground. One morning, a hospital volunteer noticed him wincing and promised she would bring him some pillows from home. The hope he felt at her promise soon turned to anger and despair as he waited all day for her to return. And he had felt hatred for this woman who had betrayed me so cruelly, he remembered. But then she did come back late in the evening with the promised pillows. She had been unavoidably delayed. The moment I saw her, my anger turned to shame. How could I have been so hateful in my thoughts? It was a turning point. He became determined to never make that mistake again. She was an angel and had returned to rescue me from my worst pain. She was also an angel who rescued me from the depths of my own anger. One morning, Shinji awoke to an unusual sight. The soldiers at the hospital were no longer wearing their swords. It was the 16th of August, a week after a second atomic bomb had dropped on Nagasaki. Japan had surrendered. The war had ended. Shinji was released from the hospital in October of 1945, a month earlier, and he had managed to send a postcard to his mother to let her know he was still alive. Now he went in search of his father. He found the ruins of their old home identifiable thanks to the distinctive patterns on the family's shattered rice bowls. Sifting through the charred remains, he made a heart-stopping discovery. A familiar round disc caked with dirt and soot. I clasped my hand around the metal mass and lifted my father's pocket watch from the debris. I recognized our house key attached to it. I turned the watch face up. The glass had been blown off, as had the watch hands. The metal was rusted and burned. The unimaginable intense heat had reached several thousand degrees Fahrenheit from the blast, had fused the shadows of the hands into the face of the timepiece, slightly displaced, leaving distinct marks where the hands had been at the moment of the explosion. It was enough to clearly see the exact moment the watch stopped. The watch had recorded the moment Shinji's world had been blown apart, 8:15. It stopped working at the very moment of the blast, forever marking that moment in time. Holding the watch in his hands, he suddenly sensed he would never see his father again. The thought hit him like another atomic blast, he says. Standing on the ruins of his home wearing someone else's clothes, he thought of the beautiful photographs taken by his father, a professional photographer. They were now ash beneath his feet. The watch was his only link to a family that had been wiped out. Although he didn't know it yet, his mother Nami had died a few days after receiving his postcard, and his brother Takashi had been killed in action in the Philippines. What happened to his father he never discovered. As an orphan of war, Shinji struggled to survive and find a place in society. In Japan, then, the harmony and connections of family were everything, says his daughter Akiko. A man without family was no better than a criminal. So when he sought permission to marry Miyoko, the sister of a childhood friend, her father said no. The couple were forced to elope. The watch remained Shinji's only family heirloom. He felt it contained a part of his father's soul. Yet, in 1949, when Hiroshima was officially designated an International Peace Memorial City, he donated it to the Peace Memorial Museum. I wanted the watch and my father's name to be widely seen and known as a reminder about the destruction and the heroism that were displayed that fateful August day.
Lots to unpack with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes you realize how something so quick, like dropping that bomb, would be the devastation it would have, you know?
Yeah. People's lives evaporated, even if they didn't die instantaneously.
Never saw his dad again, really.
No, not after he got taken to that hospital. His dad, was also severely burned and had, radiation poisoning, but he wasn't in the Army, so he didn't have the same treatment.
Yeah, a lot of comments talking about be hard to comprehend the devastation of that. Your body and mind and everything would just want to tell you to give up, you know?
Yeah. That's what he said, kept on saying, they'll let him die. But his dad said if he didn't, if he kept going, he'll be fine. And that goes on to, we were just talking about people surviving situations that you don't believe they should. This guy was 3/4 of a mile from a nuclear bomb.
Tornado they described as crazy too.
Yeah, and that's the thing, most people don't know that we're like the only country that has like a ton of tornadoes. And we're the only one that has these big ones, the ones that are dangerous. And so to see something like they've probably never seen that before. Something like that.
I think it was actually a tornado, or is it from that somehow?
It was the wind kicked up from that, that vacuum, and
yeah, it was able to create that effect.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's like an actual documented thing.
I don't know. It probably is. There's only so many times to document it, thankfully.
Yeah, I asked that because, like, in American history, you always hear about crazy things happening, like when Washington was being burned down.
Yeah.
Like a tornadic, crazy storm moves through.
It also happened in Dresden, when they firebombed Dresden. It was so fierce. The winds of Dresden were so fierce, it was ripping people up out of the ground and taking them into the firestorm.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like what are the odds at the time of this? Or like in the Washington case where it helps put out the fire.
Yeah. He even just said that they were in hell.
Someone said they think it's called a firestorm. I'm going to have to look more into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is like hell. That is like the very definition of hell.
It is.
In my opinion.
His skin is peeling off his feet as he's walking. Like,
and crawling, they had to take breaks. I wonder what the whole area was that they covered even.
made it seem like they didn't make it very far in a very long period of time.
Right.
Because they were just outside of their neighborhood, basically, or just a little bit past it when they finally met that guy. So, like, they were probably a mile. They managed to get, crawling over all those bodies and stuff. Horrible situation.
On the flip side of that, what do you think? We talk a lot about the supernatural on this show from Scary Stories. Do you think, like, an area like that, like, what kind of activity it would have if this did exist?
That's a good question. I would like to know if there's anything on the planet that will cause supernatural events to occur. It has to be the bomb.
Just the devastation from it, you'd think.
Devastation, the sheer energy release, that it's so unwieldy and unnatural. You would think that if it was going to happen anywhere, it would be there. And I want to know, like, but at the same time, you kind of got to treat it with respect. Like, you wouldn't want to be, barging in there and say, I want to go ghost hunting in Hiroshima. You'd be a horrible person. So maybe a lot of people aren't going there just because they're worried about the way it would look. But I am curious, like, do people who live there now, because people live there, and I want to know, did they see anything? It's not necessarily a culture that talks about it too much either. You're not supposed to really mention that stuff. So, like,
speaking of mentioning stuff, can you imagine the thumbnails that Jack has to make for this episode?
Oh yeah, we did not take it easy on them. Yours are going to be more normal.
Well, I mean, is it normal? It's a doll. Then you're going to have this terrible thing. You're going to have WrestleMania thing, and like it's going to be all over the place.
Yeah,
devastatingly terrible.
It's an unholy powerful weapon. Like, this is the opposite of good in every way. And what happened there is just nightmarish. It was inconceivable what happened to these people. It's inconceivable. You can't even begin to process the pain and agony it created.
I think the scary part is, like, tying this back into Fallout, because that's what kind of sparked this.
Yeah, and that's when I saw that movie, when I saw that show, that first episode, and I saw that, I was like, man, it's scary. But then I was like, people actually lived through this. This actually happened. And then when we started talking about stories, and I was already on the thinking about it. I was always like, I'll look, see if I can find the stories. And I found that one. I was like, oh my God, this is the best one. It's a little bit longer. It's not necessarily a scary story, like I said.
Pretty scary.
I mean, it's a scary situation. And it's probably the worst situation anyone could be in. He survived. He lived until very recently. I think it was 2014, 2015 when he passed away. So
it's crazy.
Yeah.
All because his dad just kept him going on, man.
Yeah.
That's a really historically neat story. I'm sure there's so many out there.
I think his dad's the only person who could take Gene Mo in a fight.
That's crazy. I don't know. Well, man, I don't have anything else to say about it. I'm just kind of pondering. I'm going to be thinking about this. See, when this happens, I tend to, like, get on my phone. I'm laying in bed. I start looking stuff up.
Yeah.
This is definitely what's going to happen because of this conversation.
There's at least one guy that I know of who survived both bombs.
Oh.
He was in Hiroshima, and he lived in Nagasaki. And so the bomb went off, and he was flung against the building, and he didn't die, obviously, but they had to take him to his county's hospital, basically, like the hospital near his home. And he was in his hospital bed when the bomb dropped.
Jeez. How far apart were they, the bombs being dropped?
I think it's like 6 days, something like that.
Jeez. This guy's like, man, I get over there, then it happens there. That's insane.
Yeah. Then he survived that one, though. He lived on to old age. So, like, it's just like some people.
No rhyme or reason, it's
keep going.
Maybe there's a rhyme or reason. I don't know, but it seems completely statistically not possible to survive both of them. So,
yeah.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?